Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with If I Could Choose Only One Work by Composer X, it would have to be work B. Well, we're dealing with the letter B because the composer is Benjamin Britten. And the work in question, well, you know this, it's got to be an opera. And there are a bunch of really superb operas to choose from. Some of you have suggested them, and some of you have guessed what it might be, and some of you have guessed correctly, because the answer is The Turn of the Screw, one of the great 20th century operas. And, remember, this is not necessarily the most popular or the best work by the composer, but the most typical, the most characteristic. And I think The Turn of the Screw really, really fits the bill for a lot of reasons. First, it's one of his chamber operas written for his own group. I mean, that inherently makes it entirely typical because he wrote it for a small ensemble that he could tour with and work with himself, that he invented. It's extraordinary. My goodness. With limited means, he has the most amazing range of color and texture and variety. But there's also more that's characteristic of Britten than just the ensemble nature and the fact that it's an opera, which was, of course, his special medium. No, it's the fact that the entire work is conceived as a theme and variations. Now, Britten was not a sonata form type composer. He was not a traditionalist in that sense at all. He wasn't a symphonic composer, although he wrote some things, like the Sinfonia da Requiem and whatnot, and the Cello Symphony. I mean, they're not his most successful pieces. And if you look at those pieces, one of the things you find is that the kinds of forms that he uses are actually pre-classical for the most part. He uses variation forms, he uses passacalias, he uses closed dance forms in simple ABA shape. His style was not dependent on the dynamics of classical tonality and thus sonata form. And so when you're dealing with Britten's formal interest, one of his most profitable avenues of exploration was the theme and variations. I mean, think about it. We've got the variations on a theme of Frank Bridge. We've got the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, which is variations in fugue on a theme by Henry Purcell. He was a wonderful variation composer, and particularly one who could write characterful variations, that is, variations in small forms of other kinds of things. And so when he came to The Turn of the Screw, he was able to conceive of a theme, a wonderful theme. Well, that's the first variation, actually. The theme itself is da 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 bum da 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 da. That uses all 12 notes of the chromatic scale, but it's not a 12-tone theme. I mean, not a bit. And each scene, and there are a bunch of short scenes in 2 acts, is preceded by an instrumental interlude, which is a variation of the theme. And that creates an enormous sense of unity, but it establishes atmosphere. It's just an incredible work of genius. It really, really is. And so we have a case where not only do we have one of the most typical works by this composer, but also one of his very, very, very greatest works, one of the great operas of the 20th century. The other thing that The Turn of the Screw really, really has going for it is a terrific story. I mean, it's just a terrific story. It focuses on just a handful of characters. There's 2 kids, 2 ghosts, and 2 protagonists, 2 female protagonists, the governess and Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper. And that's the cast. So what is it, 6 characters, all told? And it's Henry James, and the libretto was really, really well fashioned so that, it's not full of all kinds of strangeness, like the Rape of Lucretia, for example, that has like this he chorus and she chorus talking about how Jesus has something to do with the Rape of Lucretia. I mean, it's very, very strange. They frame these things in certain ways and, trying to be, well, what you might call artsy-fartsy operatic in their use of English, in their diction, in their grammar. this is just a good ghost story. And it's made an even better ghost story by the fact that it had to be turned by Mafenwi Piper into an operatic libretto, which means it had to say a lot in a few number of words. And it's just magnificent in that respect. And so I have no problem thinking that the evil god Cancrozans, I mean, some of you who come to this series late don't know what we're doing. So let me just summarize it briefly. The plot here is that the evil god Cancrozans, who is the god of classical music, and Cancrozans is spelled Cancrizans, Cancrozans. That's actually the technical term for a crab cannon, a cannon which proceeds backwards, or, forwards and backwards, whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's the god's name. And he's decided that because the classical music culture is so revolting and record labels are so awful, he's going to destroy all of classical music to eliminate senseless duplication, leaving only one work, one typical work by each major composer. And as his disciple, I have been charged with the task of coming up with a list of what those works are. But my secret plot is to show thereby that he must not do that. He must leave all the rest of that fabulous music for us to enjoy. And so the turn of the screw works in that way as well. Because not only is it a flaming, screaming, ridiculous masterpiece, but it's not Britten's most popular opera. That's Peter Grimes, which we should certainly be entitled to hear, and Billy Budd, which is amazing, and Gloriana, which still needs to be discovered. And there's so many of them, and it's wonderful. And he wrote lots of other great stuff, like, the War Requiem, which is wonderful, and, So I go with the turn of the screw to present to the evil god Cancrozans, knowing that he wouldn't dream of eliminating everything else that Benjamin Britten wrote. How could he? I mean, really. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.